Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first meeting of the Management Plans Work Group Municipal Subgroup. Thank you all for attending. So I do want to just point out we have a table set up in the room this morning. Anyone is welcome at the table. We only have microphones right now at the table. We do have a couple of handhelds for people on the sides and in the back, but if it would be helpful for having a little bit easier conversations if anyone who would like to speak would please sit at the table and speak into a microphone whenever you have a comment, please. We do have a few people on the webinar, and the microphones allow them to hear. We are also recording this meeting. My name is Natalie Mast. I am the manager working on management plans here at ADWR, and thank you all for being here today. So we'll go ahead and get started. This meeting today is really going to be some background, some groundwork before we get into some of the deeper conversations we're going to have under this subgroup. So we'll give just a little bit of an overview of the conservation program, some of the ways we have looked at this data in the past, and then we hope to have a conversation about how we might look at that data going forward to better understand the effectiveness of these programs. So just a couple logistics and groundwork type things before we get started. These meetings are open to the public, open to anyone who would like to participate. We would like this to be an open and participatory, a collaborative process. So we are hoping to learn from you all. We are hoping that you'll provide input, that you'll provide ideas, and that we'll be able to have kind of open conversations about the development of these programs. And learn from all of you with regards to what might work for changes to these programs going forward into the 5th management plan. So for a little bit of background for anyone who might have missed the first full work group meetings, the statute indicates that there should be a management plan for each active management area for each management period, and these plans contain the conservation programs for each sector. The conservation programs are supposed to be designed to achieve reductions in the withdrawals of groundwater and to help each AMA move toward its goal. So this is kind of our guiding principle as we work through this subgroup, that the programs that we develop here, the conversations we have here, this is kind of the box we need to check, which is reducing withdrawals of groundwater. Also, we have heard some questions and feedback regarding timeline, both for the 4th and 5th management plans. So I wanted to put this up here just to help address those questions and clarify a little bit. In this work group, in these subgroups, we're at the beginning of a long process. So the remaining 4th management plans, the department is hoping to have those adopted in the next 2 years. We are anticipating that this work group, that this development process is pretty much going to take that 2 years, and we're not planning to start drafting the 5th management plans until the last 4th management plan is adopted. So we're right at the beginning of this process. We have a long way to go from here. And we are wanting to focus on data analysis at this stage in the process, focusing on what does this data mean for these programs and how do we obtain the feedback that we need in order to move forward with the 5th management plan. So in order to start some of that background and get to that analysis, I would like to hand you off to Caitlin. Caitlin Parker is our municipal planner in the active management areas here at ADWR, and she's going to walk you through some of the existing programs under the 4th management plan.
Great, thank you. Thanks everybody for attending. We appreciate it. So as you guys all know, ADWR is required by statute to develop management plans for each AMA. The statutory requirement for the management plans has an emphasis on reductions and withdrawals of groundwater, and this will need to be our guiding principle when developing changes or making changes to the existing programs. There is a statutory framework with certain requirements for each management period that must be included, such as the GPC reduction and the non-per capita conservation program, but we may adjust some of the details of those existing programs, and there will also be plenty of opportunity to develop new programs. The conservation programs, yes? Sure. Do we need to close the window, maybe? Is that better? Okay. You're welcome. All right. So the municipal conservation programs can be found in Chapter 5. This is where you can find all of the information on the existing programs. But right now I'll just give you a brief overview of the current ones, starting with the total GPCD program. A provider regulated under the total GPCD program must limit the annual gallons per capita per day water usage within its service area to the amount allowed under its total GPCD requirement. This target is recalculated annually using a formula that you can find in Appendix 5A and is based on changes to population and the number of housing units. With each management plan, a new reduction target is created. Under the proposed 4MP, we used a 1 standard deviation reduction from the 2000 to 2009 data. This program is limited to large designated providers and has been relatively static over time with some reduction strategies in between management plans. And the statutory language is kind of relatively vague, so we may have some more opportunity here to develop this program. This is just the number of providers in each AMA in this program, with Phoenix and Tucson holding most of those providers. The municipal non-per capita program is probably one that you're most familiar with. The non-per capita conservation program is a tiered best management practice, or BMP point system. The number of service connections a provider has will determine which tier they fall into. Each tier has a requirement for the total amount of BMPs implemented. Large undesignated providers are to be regulated under the NPCCP, while designated providers may elect to be regulated in this program instead of the total GPCD program. A provider profile is submitted when entering a program or changing tiers. This provider profile is submitted when entering a program or changing tiers, like I said. This profile contains data on service area characteristics, including water use, BMPs, public education program, etc. The current BMPs are detailed in Appendix 5C in each AMA's plan. The public education program is a requirement for all providers in the NPCCP. Twice a year, a provider must notify its customers of the importance of water conservation and must make written material available to them. This is all in addition to the BMPs that must be implemented based on the provider's tier. BMPs must be reasonably relevant to the provider's existing service area and the water use characteristics. A majority of the providers are in Tier 1, which currently means that they'd have to do one BMP, with a lot of them, again, in the Phoenix and Tucson AMA. Here are the 3MP and 4MP point systems for the non-per capita conservation program and how those systems have been adjusted over the management plans. We want to use these known structures and changes to start to think about how we might shape things under the 5 MPs. You will notice that the points target and some values have increased from the 3MP, and this is in an effort to increase conservation targets while incentivizing practices that are seen as most effective. Again, there's going to be opportunity here to restructure the points and edit some of those BMPs. We are also looking for a better way to assess the effectiveness of each of those BMPs. This is the lost and unaccounted for water. Large and small providers must limit their lost and unaccounted for water. Large providers must be under 10%, while small providers must be under 15%. And this is pretty much like the main conservation requirement for those small providers. Some other programs that you may not be as familiar with are the Alternative Conservation Program and the Institutional Provider Program. These are kind of like a hybrid of the non-per capita conservation program and the GPCD program. What's unique about these programs is they only include residential GPCD and do not include non-residential in the calculation. There are currently 0 providers in the Alternative Conservation Program, and I think there might be like 1 in the Institutional Provider Program. So that's just like a brief overview of the current programs. We would like to think about how we can expand upon these existing programs and how and if we develop new programs. Do you guys have any questions about those programs? No? All right, I'm going to pass it on over to Natalie, and she'll talk to you guys about the municipal data.
Sure. Thanks, Caitlin. So we laid the groundwork for a lot of this at the Management Plans Work Group meeting on August 20th, but we will review a little bit and then also move into more specific municipal data. There we go. When we talk about reported data inside the AMAs, this is really what we're talking about. So we're referring to the AMA annual reports. Users with wells that are larger, greater than 35 gallons per minute inside the AMAs and INAs must meter their pumping, and those who are subject to reporting requirements must file an annual report with ADWR. These reports contain a very broad range of information, but most typically what we see from the various sectors is the types and volumes of water, volume of groundwater pumped by a well, and the report may include various types of end use as well. And then additional information related to the conservation requirements, depending on what program the particular user is in, may be required under those annual reports. So there are certain reporting requirements laid out in statute, but ADWR does have the authority to require additional reporting requirements. So this is also something we'd like to have a conversation about under this group is, do we have enough data as it is, or do we need additional data in order to better understand the effectiveness of these programs? Part of the discussion today and moving forward will be figuring out how to collect that data, and also how do we analyze that data in order to move these programs into the 5th Management Plan and beyond. So I keep talking about we want to analyze these programs. We want to determine the effectiveness of these programs. We also want to be transparent about that analysis. So ADWR is planning to publish the analysis that will be done under this group and also the other subgroups as a part of this conservation progress report. So we'll publish this analysis of each conservation program for each sector and also of each AMA's progress toward its goal. This is in an effort to be transparent about how we use this data and how we're understanding these programs. So the next couple slides here are examples of how we have displayed or analyzed this data in the past. So what we kind of want to think through as we walk through these slides is, are there additional ways we should be looking at this? Are there additional breakdowns that we should be doing with this information? So I know this is a little bit hard to see, but I'll talk you through what you can see on this slide here. So what we have here is an example from the Phoenix AMA looking at water use on the y-axis, and then, whoops, sorry about that. Let's go. And then years along the bottom. So the different colors here are the different types of water, with groundwater, inlet water, surface water, Colorado River water, and treated effluent from top to bottom there, or bottom to top, excuse me. So So maybe some things that we can think about under this subgroup, and as we're looking into how we might better analyze this data in order to understand the particular programs is, should we break this down further? Should it be large providers and small providers? What is relevant here? So we're really hoping to start some of those conversations as we move through this group. Here's another example from the Phoenix AMA, and what you can see here is the bottom piece in orange is a population of large and small providers, and the blue line is GPCD, gallons per capita per day, over time. So you can see that even with growing populations, that the GPCD is coming down. So this is, again, another example of how we've looked at this information in the past, and maybe there's ways that we can improve upon this and better determine what's relevant and how we understand this in the context of our programs. In some AMAs, exempt wells is a larger concern than others. What you can see here, again, for an example from the Phoenix AMA, is the line is total number of exempt wells, where the purple bars, are exempt wells added each year. So you can see with the exempt wells added in each year that there are times where you see a lot of growth in the installation of exempt wells and times where that growth is slower, but that the total number of exempt wells does tend to grow pretty steadily over time. And with this information, perhaps there's additional things that we could consider here. Exempt well demands are currently estimated by ADWR, but perhaps there's a better way that we could go about that. Perhaps we should consider that methodology and have a conversation about that under this subgroup. So what I would like to move into is a time to have some of those conversations. So this work group, again, is the stakeholder forum for the 5th management plans. The first goal here is assessing these existing conservation programs. So there's going to be some data analysis here, but our first step is also getting feedback from you all to make sure that we're understanding the data in the same way you all do. I know there are always going to be things that you all better understand about your operations and the way you look at this information that's going to be different from how I look at it. So we want to hear from you on what are the best ways to analyze this data? How can we best understand these programs, and how do we look at the effectiveness of these programs in order to better determine what should be changed and how we can develop these programs or additional programs moving forward? So here I have some things on the screen that might be ideas for all of that. Some possible ways to look at the data that we have. Something we've struggled with in the past is with the non-per capita program. The BMPs aren't necessarily quantitative. So that's something that we would love to get some feedback on is how do we understand the effectiveness of the BMP program? Is there a way to look at this program to do some kind of a quantitative analysis of that non-per capita program and those BMPs? Another conversation that we hear a lot about from various water users is the difference between total GPCD or a municipal GPCD and just the residential GPCD. We know that residential GPCDs do tend to go down over time, but municipal GPCDs or total GPCDs might be a different story depending on the makeup of the service area. And then past that, we have some open questions about, do we need additional data? Are there additional data sources we should be looking at? Or should we be considering changes to the reported data that we receive over time? So does anybody have any questions or ideas or input that they'd like to have at this time? And for those of you in the back, we do have a handheld microphone in the back. Please wait for the microphone. Raise your hand and wait for the microphone because we do have a couple people on the webinar who won't be able to hear you without the microphone. So does anybody have any questions, comments, thoughts on what we've covered so far? Thank you, Patrick.
Patrick Adams with AMWA. Has the department identified any specific data gaps for particular BMPs that would help quantify the effectiveness of those conservation measures?
That's a good question. So data gaps for particular BMPs. I think what we've struggled with that data analysis so far is that there's not a good way to understand the BMPs as a whole and understand their effectiveness. We don't gather good data around water savings or the impact of each BMP. So we don't really have, so I guess the data gap there would be that we don't have a lot of information to analyze those BMPs. We could look at maybe changes in water use of a provider according to which BMPs they're using and see if certain BMPs are correlated with larger changes in water use, but there's not really good direct ways to analyze those BMPs at this point.
So maybe a suggestion would be that if you have no data measuring the effectiveness of BMPs, maybe trying to tailor a requirement within them where possible would be a good start. It's a pretty general suggestion, but
sure. Okay. Anybody else? If nothing,
follow up
sure.
on this gentleman's comment. Perhaps it would be useful. I'm sure you as staff from ADWR have put a lot of thought into how to quantify and how to qualify the analysis in these particular areas to give you some of the statistical data that you need. It might be useful for you to provide a bushel basket of options or things that you've thought about for us to consider.
I just have a question. I know that some people who are in the NPCCP program, you fill out that CER form with your annual report.
That's a conservation efforts report.
Yeah, the conservation efforts report. So on there, you list the BMPs that you do, and then you can rate them as highly effective, slightly effective, and normal. So how are you guys determining that they are highly effective on your own, or if they are slightly effective? That would be helpful for us to know in which ways you determine each BMP is effective for your system.
Just push the button, the green light will come on.
I kind of feel like if I have a BMP in place, it should be as effective, or I would take that out. So it's a little bit difficult to have those answers or just check boxes. I do think the BMPs could be written so we do start to collect information. To me, it's what's the state need as well. I don't want to collect information that's not useful for this group to determine that.
Yeah, and we can definitely consider redesigning the CER form to better help with the reporting. I think we just also need some time to figure out how to analyze each of the BMPs because there are so many of them.
That's great.
Okay, sorry. So I'm Dina with City of Chandler, and I know we've discussed how we measure in different ways effectiveness. So some of the things that we look at is just overall water savings from each of the different programs. We'll look at the year before and the year after we had a touch point with them, whether that's a rebate or, say, a water audit, and see if they are seeing improvements in their water savings. Sometimes we also do an evaluation of the cost of the program versus the gallon saved, so dollars spent per gallon saved, to see if it's effective from an economic perspective.
Great. Okay. Sure.
Sorry, I'm Brent, and I'm from the Pinal County AMA. I'm from Florence. The one thing that's been running through my head since you guys came and presented to the Pinal AMA here a few weeks ago is the irony associated with the intent of these programs to reduce groundwater pumping, and yet from a state perspective, we're, at least in the Pinal AMA, we're on a path of encouraging additional groundwater pumping to reduce use of Colorado River water. How do you deal with that as part of these management plans? On one side, you're trying to conserve, and on the other side, the state is trying to encourage additional groundwater pumping.
Sure. So we certainly understand that tension there. And under the management plans, under the statutory authority that we have with the management plans, there's certain limitations. So living within that tension, but under the management plans, we want to understand that that's a reality, and particularly in the Pinal AMA, and that's why we want to consider how we're developing these programs within our statutory authority here to respond to what those realities are. We know that we have water issues across the state. We want to use these management plans as a stepping stone, as a part of the state as a whole's strategy of moving into this drier future, understanding that we need to make progress, conservation progress. So the management plans here are just one piece of that. They're not going to be the answer to everything. So in the municipal sector, in the other sectors, we want to design these programs to reduce the withdrawals of groundwater, but within the statutes and within the framework that we have.
I also want to clarify a nuance about that. So we don't necessarily encourage groundwater pumping. We discourage Colorado River water use. So I know it sounds similar, but there is a difference there. We also have a lot of efforts into conservation and efficiency within those irrigation districts.
And if I could follow up on something you said earlier, you were talking about a bushel basket of concepts or data, or can you clarify what you meant by that a little bit?
Sure. What I was referring to is you guys' request that as part of the 4th, 5th management plan updates, a lot of the BMP analysis that you're trying to conduct, and it sounds like that we're also conducting from our side, is qualitative. And you would prefer if there were data collection methods and ways to analyze data in a more quantitative way. So if you have ideas in terms of the information you'd like to have, the data that you'd like to be able to analyze, and how we can assist you with that, it'd be nice if you provided a list of things for us to consider, because from our perspective, you may want information that we can't provide, but I'm sure there will be synergy on some levels that you'll have wants that we can provide.
Sure.
So it would be nice to know what you'd like to see, because I'm sure you guys do a lot more thinking about it than I do, to see if we can meet in the middle and come up with some synergies.
Fair enough. And my personal bias is always toward quantitative analysis. That doesn't mean that this analysis particularly has to be quantitative. If there are good qualitative analyses that we can do, we're certainly open to that. I guess the point here was that the quantitative analysis of that particular program is an area where we've kind of struggled, where we've seen data gaps in the past. Any other questions or comments on this section? Ooh.
Yeah. Hi, Ray Jones with the Water Utilities Association. Just a couple of comments. One, the private water companies have to deal with the commission, and so I think as we go through the process, at certain points, we'll probably need to make sure the commission staff is involved in making sure that whatever we do works for them, because if it doesn't, then they'll embark us on some other program by tariff or something. So always need to keep that in mind, that we have to coordinate with the commission as appropriate, particularly, I guess, thinking about a 5th management plan, which is sort of the end of the line and maybe kind of the permanent management plan, at least under current structure. And the other thing I would just point out, because it popped into my mind as you were going through the slides, is that water loss evaluation as a percentage is really no longer a best practice in the U.S. or internationally, and we may want to think about other ways to look at water loss as well.
Okay. we can certainly make sure that we have the ACC on our mailing lists and that they're invited to attend and participate in this. And with regards to the water loss, we did mention that lost and unaccounted for is one of the criteria that we look at for compliance. We're certainly open to conversations about all of these components and whether they're the right fit moving forward. So thank you for that. Okay. McKenna, do we have any questions on the phone? Okay. Okay. So for anyone on the webinar, we do I think we just have you unmuted. So if you have questions, you can feel free to chime in. Thank you. John?
John Munderloh, Town of Prescott Valley. One of our big issues in the Prescott AMA is exempt wells, the proliferation of which comprise 10% of the state's total in an area that is 0.5% of the state's area. And so as a total, they're roughly the third largest provider in the Prescott AMA. Our communities there are large providers. Prescott Valley have been working in various groups to try to bring the exempt wells into the water conservation community with a variety of programs. And would you consider adding that type of activity to the list of BMPs?
Can you clarify that a little bit?
Well, aside from developing a water conservation messaging program that we largely all pay for, the exempt well people don't. But we also have programs that we've worked with, INF's well aware of, with the rainwater harvesting and aquifer recharge programs, which will lead to, we're starting to have conversations with Yavapai County, the other communities that have a large number of exempt wells, towards creating low water use or no impact type incentives for new homes on exempt wells, those sorts of things, so that we can kind of help bring through an incentive-based method exempt wells into the goal of safe yield. But it takes time and resources away from our communities to do so. It's important for us, but it'd be kind of cool if it was like a BMP.
I think it's certainly something we're open to considering. Associated with this process, we'll certainly be talking through the BMPs and whether those BMPs are still the correct BMPs to have, whether we should add some, remove some, that sort of thing. So I think that's definitely a possibility to have on the table. And maybe to pull back just a little bit, too, I think when we talk about exempt wells, we know that is a big concern for the Prescott AMA. So that kind of thought process around, well, are we estimating these uses in the right way? Are we understanding these uses in the right way? That's definitely a conversation that we could have with you all and make sure that the estimates that we create around those exempt well uses are in line with what you all see as well.
John, would that also be helpful if there were more value given to your outreach under a program like that for your AMA?
Well, I think it provides incentives for that activity to take place. So all of us live in a world where we have to get our budgets approved and our work outlined by our legislators, whether they be a town council or whatever. So when we can have that backup material and saying, hey, this is something that the Department of Water Resources sees as a valuable activity, it allows us to kind of keep on and do those things. Another issue for us, again, outside of our service areas, we provide water service to areas that do not have wastewater collection. And it's, kind of a legacy from, before the Groundwater Management Act and that sort of thing. So if there were incentives for us to provide sewer service to areas that receive groundwater, but are currently on septic systems, we'd probably support that as well.
Okay. Thank you, John. else? All right. Well, if we don't have any other questions on this section, we will move on. Okay, so another conversation we wanted to have as a part of this meeting was what does the structure of this group look like? So we know the other subgroups are meeting tomorrow and in the coming weeks, and we're going to have the same conversation with each of the groups. We do want, since we're hoping for a collaborative process here, we do want kind of buy-in on how we structure this from you all. So kind of open questions here for this group are, how frequently should we meet? What should our next dates be? Are there additional background topics that we, ADWR, should bring, or should we have other people come present, bring ideas, bring background information, that sort of thing? So again, I'd like to open it up and see if anybody has any feedback on any of those items. So maybe touching on the first one, the frequency, I think what we would recommend might be no more than 1 or 2 meetings in between each main group meeting. We are kind of trying to feel things out a little bit, looking for how we focus this group, how do we move forward with this group, how do we best obtain input and feedback from you all in order to have kind of a collaborative process and move this all forward. Any questions? Any ideas? So if nobody has any thoughts on that, I think our proposal would be that we'll work internally to determine kind of what our next steps are regarding the data analysis here. We would certainly love to hear from you all regarding ideas for that data analysis. We have gotten some good thoughts here already, and perhaps there's additional questions that we can follow up on. But we would come back with a proposed date over email in the coming weeks once we've had the other subgroup meetings and have determined what that schedule might look like. Oh, yes, thanks, Jackie.
I have a question for the group, for everyone that's here in the room, because a lot of you are much smarter and knowledgeable about water. Does anybody have thoughts about who should be coming to talk to us? Are there people out there with better ideas, with knowledge, with just something they should be sharing with this group? So we got all the brains right here.
I've got an answer for you. Noticeably, as I look around the room today, I don't see people from the large development community in here, which very much is a part of who we provide to from the municipal perspective. And I'm a little bit confused why I don't see the big dogs from the development world in here, because the future of BMPs for the municipal group is very much going to impact them. So I find that odd. Jackie. There's a few.
Oh, there's Spencer. Yeah. Okay. Always keeping an eye on it. We appreciate your water.
So I do both. I'm here on behalf of a water provider, but I'll tell you that that this discussion is largely about conservation requirements. And that has really been within the expertise of the municipal providers. You know, how do they work? What can we do? What can we not do? Private water companies versus cities. And so, to the extent the requirements that tend to hit the development community are in the industrial program. So I think that's one of the reasons why you're not seeing a lot of representation here.
Okay. Thank you. So maybe a suggestion for, oh, sorry, did I miss a hand somewhere?
Go
maybe a suggestion for an outside presentation that might be interesting is maybe one of the cities would be willing to come and talk to us a little bit more about the ways that they do analyze the BMPs. You mentioned that you look at gallons or dollars by gallon saved. Understanding how you look at that, how you understand the BMPs and analyze them for your own purposes might be really helpful for us in our process of analyzing those BMPs, determining which ones are effective, which ones we might keep, which ones we might get rid of, new ones we might add, that kind of thing. So that might be an opportunity for a potential guest presentation, I guess. Leslie, did you have a question?
I think more so a comment. So Leslie with the City of Prescott. Along with the gentleman from Florence, I believe what I'm hearing is that you have dived into the information that's available. You've been looking at these annual reports from the different municipalities for quite a long time. And I think it would be helpful for you to bring back your ideas and show us what you're thinking. The measure right now has always been gallons per capita per day. You know, are you under it or are you not under it? You know, and that's been pretty much it. On a previous slide, you had mentioned breaking that out. Our community broke that out and started looking at it, residential GPCD versus the overall community GPCD, because there was confusion there. Then we can start targeting, you know, is it our residential folks that are struggling, or is it, you know, the overall community needs some more help? For Prescott, we're much different than the metropolitan area, so we're going to be listening. There are things that are going to work better in the more metropolitan areas than in a somewhat rural area. We are predominantly serving residential. Our pie chart is very little industrial, very little kind of ag, construction, commercial. We are predominantly residential, so we know where we need to target. The conversation probably needs to start changing. We talk about conservation. I mean, I grew up in Tucson. I still know the jingle of beat the peak, never water 4 to 8. So there's certain things that we need to look at is how do we communicate back out. But I think, you know, so we've been hammering the conservation. I think what we're seeing, and you've shown in charts, our community can show it too, we've grown, but we're using less water. So are we really talking a conversation more about being efficient with water supplies? When we encourage our big box stores to bring in the most efficient products, then that benefits the community. If they're dumping their, you know, less efficient products into our stores, then we know that we're not getting those higher efficiency items in. So I think it would benefit. I think you have quite a bit of knowledge that maybe you're just not quite sure if you should step out with it yet. But I think there is benefit in stepping out. The department saying, we've looked at these things, here's are some of our ideas. And then those of us in the room that are going to have different conditions in the areas that we live, whether it be our demographics or our geology or our economics, you know, where we're at, then we'll have to start negotiating those out to see what is going to work. I'll wrap this up as quickly as I can, but the City of Prescott hasn't had a difficult time meeting their GPCD requirement. And so we did do the modified non-per capita. I could see that those were just things we were going to do anyways. We were going to communicate with our public. And then when we saw something not working, you know, maybe it wasn't having the same draw. People are of that nature. They want something new and shiny sometimes. And so we come out with something that looks a little new, but we're still, the story of water in Arizona and the Southwest is we are always going to be training the next generation as to how to best live in the conditions that they have. And they're going to be different conditions, whether you're in the Pinal area or southern Arizona or further up in, you know, in a Sholo area. And I know they're not an AMA, and I know they're not, but it doesn't matter. There's going to be efficiencies they have to look at because of their geology. So I look forward to hearing from you. I think having speakers come in, there might be a point for that, a time for that. But I think a lot of us know what we somewhat need to do to keep working towards that better future for our communities. So we love your help because you have lots of data. Thank you.
I think David was first here. Sorry about that.
Thank you. To part of your message, which is next generation and things like that, it occurs to me that as we have these conversations about BMPs and gallons per day per capita and conservation in general, to a point that's been made several times in earlier discussions, both at the larger level, it would be really good data, I think, for all of us in the AMAs to know what our resource base is, to help drive the message, to help provide intellectual and other incentives. It would be nice to know the focus is groundwater. We don't have an idea, well, we do, but we don't have any official idea as to how much we have or don't have. And I hate to sound like the broken record, but so be it. We need the model report. That's part of what we are working with. And we can come up with conservation measures, and we can do all kinds of really fancy things, but we need a foundation, and that's part of the foundational data.
Understood. I can't really comment on that. I certainly haven't been involved with all of that, but I would note here that that piece of it is a little bit separate from what we're working on here. So our statutory structure is that we are working toward reducing withdrawals of groundwater. The total supply as regulated under the Assured Water Supply Program is a little bit separate from that. What we're focusing on is just reductions at this point for this particular group. And as we move into the fifth management plan, we want to adjust these programs in a way that reduces withdrawals of groundwater.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to ask with Senator Lisa Tondo, when anyone speaks, can they please announce who they are and present themselves?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson.
So this is Rob Anderson with Fenimore Craig. I'm here on behalf of Robeson Communities water companies. A lawyer's being asked to speak up. Okay, I'll do it. Did you say speak longer? No. Rob Anderson, Fenimore Craig, here on behalf of Robeson Communities affiliated water companies. Just a couple of points. First of all, echo what David was saying. The Pinell model actually is important because our building block in all this is where are we getting in terms of meeting the management goals for the various AMAs, and one of the things I was mulling over whether to mention, but I think it is important, and it builds off of what David is talking about, is I think one of the things that's important to understand as a group is, okay, if we're going to start ratcheting down, how badly do we need to ratchet down? And to answer that question, we first need to know what is the municipal sector's role in safe yield. And there's been a lot of things that have changed since the Groundwater Management Act was adopted in 1980. Probably the most significant one is the municipal sector in terms of growth. In the Phoenix AMA is largely a safe yield. It is essentially you have to replenish groundwater or you have to get off of groundwater, one or the other. There's some residual ways to use it. In the Pinell AMA, there's been an increasing push. Of course, we have a different management goal of planned depletion, but we have a real push to get more replenishment down there. The department has recently changed its rules, increasing that obligation. And so what you're going to see is the municipal sector is actually, helping to contribute. So understanding what is the municipal sector's role in terms of the overall goal, I think, would be helpful to understand. And that the Pinell County model does, not Pinell County, I'm sorry, the Pinell AMA groundwater model does play into that. What is exactly, where are we sitting long terms in terms of meeting that planned depletion goal?
So under the Safe Yield subgroup, which I have a date up here, it's in a couple weeks, 9/23 is the date for that. Under the Safe Yield subgroup, we are going to be talking about those analyses regarding Safe Yield, both how we analyze it on an annual basis, what are all the inflows and outflows related to analyzing Safe Yield, as well as how we understand it maybe from a sector contribution perspective, kind of like you're talking about, and also on a long-term basis, because our statutory definition of safe yield does include a long-term analysis. So I think some of those conversations are going to occur, but would occur probably under that group rather than here. Any other questions?
It's probably just reiterating it, but I'd like to see what the department has been working on and what they've come up with.
Sure.
I think that you can probably see, you showed at the last one, I brought our overdraft graph and looked at the other AMAs and how things were looking. I think you probably have some gut feelings of what has worked to bring down usage. And then those of us in our individual communities also have a good feeling of what those might be. So if there are things that have worked well, I'd be very curious to know what the department thinks has worked well for Tucson. Their graph looks much different than some of the other areas. We also know that we've learned over time, and it's no surprise, you charge more for water, people are more efficient with it. So is that the main, one of those big key items is that we'll be charging more for water in the future, but keeping an equitable base block because it has to be available for everybody. Is it, we have discussions about, we should have more rebate programs, but is that really the key to getting one toilet here and one toilet there, or should we be looking at bigger picture items into the future where we invest in ourselves, different communities in the state, to bring in those efficiencies in whatever, toilets or whatever, more things like that. So I would be very curious. I hope that if you're seeing things that you think work, we should look at what's worked. Do we continue those on, and to what degree, or do we ramp them up? And we have to be careful how far we ramp up, too. There is a cushion that you need to keep for when things become a hotter and drier climate, if that's where we're going, which we may or may not. Maybe we won't. But where is the cushion? And we know that the cushion has generally been in the ag sector. But a lot of us don't have high ag, and I don't think they have to bear it on their backs entirely either. So it'll be interesting to see what the other groups come up with. So just a few thoughts there is, we need to be looking a little bit bigger maybe. I know that we're very narrow in what you said. We can't necessarily be looking at how this all integrates, but ultimately I think we have to. But I understand your direction. I would step back and look at, I went back and read the fifth management plan in statute and what it required, and if you can walk us through that so that we all start on the same page of what your expectations are. There were some initial calculations, and they're foreign to me because we don't have to use them up in the Prescott AMA, but you do have to use them in this area, and they're related to CAGRID numbers or something like that. I might be off. So if you can lay out your plan as to, these are the things that the statute requires, these are the things we're going to start, addressing, and now as a group that's sitting around here, give us your feedback. I think that would be helpful.
Sure. I appreciate that, Leslie. So with regards to the statutes for the fifth management plan, largely the statutes reference back to the language for the fourth management plan for the fifth management plan. So the requirements for the fifth management plan are nearly identical to the fourth management plan. For the municipal sector in particular, it references per capita reductions, so some kind of a GPCD type program, and it also references that we should have a non-per capita program. There's also language in there that allows us to develop other types of programs. So there could be something that we come up with that's totally outside of those two main programs that we've seen here already. So maybe that's a short answer to what could be a much longer presentation. So yes, definitely. Thank you. Sure.
Leslie, I also want to touch a little bit about the BMP and what we may have found that is successful. And one of the reasons why we have so many BMPs, this is, by the way, Einav, and I manage the Active Management Area section at AWR. One of the reasons why we have so many BMPs is that each provider has their own unique characteristics, and some BMPs may work for some providers and others would work for others. So it may be, and some may be very successful across the board, but some may be very specific, and one provider may find that a certain BMP would be really successful, while others would find it not successful at all. And I think that's where we've been a little, we had the challenge of evaluating more of the specific BMPs and how effective they are on an overall basis. And I would, if you don't mind, kind of throw it back at you, and if the municipalities would like to inform us what is effective for you and how it's effective, I think it would be really good for us to include it in our records as BMPs and maybe target the BMPs, or at least advise municipalities what BMPs would maybe work better for their unique characteristics.
Yes, we can provide those. Be happy to. And that's where I started, is that we're not all the same in this room. Our customer base looks different, our geology looks different, our economics look different, and so I understand fully, the range of a BMP, and we had done that program as well, and we selected the ones that work best for us. If it comes down to something so simple as we need to make reductions, or we should be thinking about encouraging better conservation or more efficiency, then it might be just a flat number. But I think that the flip side is if we try that out, then we also have to reduce, the stick that comes with that. So if we're going to carrot out for something, a reduction of some sort, we need to have that time to work on it versus having the regulatory, response on that as well. So I think that we are just exploring this at the very beginning here, so I look forward to listening in, whether it's on the web or here personally, in person. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. We are just about out of time here, but we could have time for just a couple more comments if anybody else had any thoughts. So maybe someone can jump in here if my impression is wrong. What I'm kind of hearing from the group is that perhaps our next meeting could be something of once ADWR and our staff have a chance to dig into some of these, explore some of these additional analyses that we have discussed that we would like to do, we can come back and kind of present our interpretation, our framework of that data for each AMA. And we could use the next meeting to kind of dive deeper into what we see in that data. Does anybody have any thoughts on timeline for that meeting? I would probably put it out a couple months just so we have time to actually do that analysis. Okay. November? Okay. Okay. We'll look at sometimes we'll see what we can pull together in that kind of time frame. We do appreciate you all being here. We appreciate your participation. We will be posting these slides on our website. We do have a web page dedicated to the management plans work group, so we'll be posting those slides there. And if any of you have any additional feedback or questions, you can always reach us at managementplans@azwater.gov. Thank you for your time. We really appreciate you all being here. Thanks.